You won't believe what I accidentally walked in on while my alien roommate was changing, but she didn't seem to mind at all. Jake Martinez had been living on the orbital station Prometheus 7 for exactly 3 months when he got assigned a new roommate, and nobody told him she would be from another planet. Housing coordinator sent him a message one Tuesday morning saying that due to overcrowding in the alien diplomatic quarters, someone from the Varelian delegation would be moving into his spare bedroom, and Jake, who was just a maintenance technician working to pay off his student loans, didn't have much choice in the matter. Her name was Lyra, and she arrived the next day with only 2 bags and a strange device that hummed softly when she set it down, and Jake tried not to stare because she'd been briefed about humans and their tendency to be awkward around other species, but her skin had this faint purple tint that shifted to blue under certain lights, and her eyes were larger than human eyes with vertical pupils like a cat. They shook hands, and her hand was warm and had 6 fingers instead of 5, and Jake said welcome and tried to act normal even though he'd never actually met an alien up close before. First week was strange but not bad, and Lyra was quiet and kept to herself mostly, and she worked at the station as some kind of cultural liaison, which meant she spent most of her time in meetings trying to help humans and Vrelians understand each other better. Jake learned that she ate different food than him, and that she needed the temperature in her room to be much warmer than he liked, and that she made these soft musical sounds when she was thinking, which he found oddly relaxing. Also learned that Vrelian culture had very different ideas about privacy and personal space than human culture. Did not happen on a Friday evening when Jake came home early from his shift because they'd finished repairing the cooling system in Sector 9 ahead of schedule, and he walked into the apartment calling out that he was home, but Lyra didn't answer. Figured she was still at work, so he headed toward his room to change out of his work clothes, but he had to pass by her bedroom, and the door was open just a crack, and without thinking he glanced inside. As he walked past, Lyra was standing in the middle of her room, and she wasn't wearing her usual diplomatic uniform or really anything at all, and Jake froze in the hallway. His brain completely shutting down. She was in the process of changing clothes, and her Vrelian physiology was on full display, and Jake noticed that her skin had intricate patterns that glowed faintly in the dim light of her room like bioluminescent tattoos, and her body was humanoid, but different in ways that made his face burn with embarrassment. Made it worse was that she turned and looked directly at him, and their eyes met, and Jake expected her to scream or slam the door or at least look upset, but instead she just tilted her head slightly and made that soft musical sound she made when she was thinking. Jake stammered out an apology and said he didn't mean to look, and he would just go to his room now, and he started backing away. But Lyra called out to him in her accented English and told him to wait. Stopped and kept his eyes fixed on the floor, and his heart was hammering in his chest, and he felt like the worst roommate in the entire station. Lyra asked him why he was acting strange, and Jake tried to explain that in human culture, walking in on someone while they were undressed was considered very rude and private and embarrassing. There was a pause, and then Lyra made a sound that he realized was laughter, and she said that Vrelians didn't have the same concept of modesty that humans did, and that bodies were just bodies, and there was nothing shameful about them. She told him he could look up, and when he hesitantly did, she had wrapped something around herself and was standing in the doorway looking on. Musej explained that on her planet, Vrelians often changed clothes in communal spaces, and that the idea of hiding one's body was connected to human religious and cultural history that her species didn't share. Jake felt his embarrassment slowly fading and being replaced by curiosity, and he asked her if that meant she wasn't upset with him, and she said of course not, and that she understood it was an accident. He stood there in the hallway for a moment, and then Lyra invited him to sit and talk because she said this was actually a good opportunity to discuss cultural differences and maybe prevent future awkward moments. Etta sat in the common area, and Lyra explained more about Vrelian culture and how they viewed bodies and privacy, and Jake shared more about human customs and why certain things made humans uncomfortable. Learned that Vrelians didn't really have a concept of embarrassment about physical forms because their society had evolved differently, and they saw bodies as practical vessels rather than something to be hidden or shamed. Aflair also explained that the glowing patterns on her skin were actually part of how Vrelians communicated emotion, and that Different colors meant different things, and Jake found this fascinating. She showed him how when she was happy. The patterns glowed a soft gold color, and when she was thinking deeply they turned silvery blue, and when she was upset, which she said was rare, they flickered red. Jake asked if the patterns were always visible, or if she could hide them, and Lyra said they were always there. But humans usually couldn't see them under her clothes, and she usually wore full coverage uniforms because she knew it made humans more comfortable. Over the next few weeks, Jake and Lyra became actual friends instead of just awkward roommates who avoided each other, and they started having dinner together sometimes and watching old Earth movies, which Lyra found hilarious because she said human entertainment was very dramatic. Jake learned that Lyra had volunteered to come to the station because she wanted to understand humans better, and she believed that the alliance between their species was important for the future of the galaxy. She told him stories about her home planet, which had purple skies and 3 moons, and cities that were built into massive trees that had been growing for thousands of years. Jake told her about Earth, and about growing up in California, and about how Head always dreamed of going to space but never imagined Head end up sharing an apartment with someone from another world. An evening, they were watching a movie, and Lyra asked Jake why humans were so fascinated by romance and relationships, and why it seemed to be the center of so much human art and culture. Jake tried to explain about human pair bonding and how humans were social creatures who craved connection, and Lyra listened carefully and said that Varelians also formed bonds, but they were different and not always romantic or exclusive. Asked if Jake had a mate, and he laughed and said no, and that had been too busy with work and school to really date much, and Lyra nodded and said that humans seemed to put a lot of pressure on themselves to find perfect partners. As more time passed, Jake realized he was starting to see Lyra differently, and not just as his alien roommate, but as someone he genuinely cared about and enjoyed spending time with. Noticed little things like the way she hummed when she was cooking, or how she always made sure to ask out of his day, or how her patterns glowed brighter when he made her laugh on night Jake came home after a particularly bad shift, where everything had gone wrong, and he was frustrated and tired, and Lyra took one look at him and immediately started making him tea, which Shed learned was a human comfort ritual. They sat together, and Jake vented about his day, and Lyra listened without judgment, and when he finally ran out of words, she told him that she thought he was very good at his job, and that the station was lucky to have him. Jake felt something shift in his chest, and he looked at Lyra, really looked at her, and saw not just an alien, but someone who had become important to him. Asked her if Relians ever formed bonds with other species, and Lyra was quiet for a moment, and then said that it was rare, but not impossible, and that her people believed connection could happen between any beings who truly understood each other. Jake asked if she thought a human and a Vrelian could understand each other well enough for that, and Lyra smiled, and her patterns glowed that soft gold color, and she said she thought they already did. They talked late into the night about what that might mean, and about the complications, and about how their cultures viewed relationships differently, and about whether they were ready to navigate all of that. Lyra explained that for Velian's bonding was about mental and emotional connection more than physical attraction, and that she had felt drawn to Jake because of his kindness and curiosity and the way he tried to understand her world. Jake admitted that he had been drawn to her too, and that at first had been fascinated by how different she was, but now he just saw her as Lyra, and the fact that she was Varelian was just one part of who she was. They decided to take things slowly and to keep learning about each other, and to see where this connection might lead. The other humans on the station started to notice that Jake and Lyra spent a lot of time together, and some of them whispered and stared, but Jake found that he didn't really care because Lyra made him happy in a way he hadn't expected. Lyra taught him some of her language, and Jake taught her how to make pizza, which she said was surprisingly good for human food, and they developed their own routines and inside jokes. And Day, Lyra's supervisor, called her in for a meeting and told her that the Varelian delegation was concerned about her relationship with a human, and that it might complicate her work as a cultural liaison.